Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Got a lot of ground to cover today. We want to talk about the MSU Deer study as well as a couple listener questions. The listener questions are down in the show notes if you want to look at the timestamps and get ahead to those. But first, we're going to talk about a bunch of other stuff, including Southern Outdoorsman merch. If you ordered an orange hat recently, which a bunch of you have, we got a shipping notification today. We're recording this the day before this podcast drops. So those hats should be on the way. Normally, shipping's pretty fast. Hopefully, we'll be able to get those out either Friday of this week or Monday of next week. So hopefully Monday at the latest, but early next week for sure, those are going to be going out to people. So orange hats finally coming in, man. Yep. Pretty excited about that. Jacob, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Appreciate everybody's been purchasing some Southern Outdoorsman merch because all the new hats have been selling extremely quickly. Appreciate that support there. And also, a lot of you guys has been purchasing some Southern Outdoorsman merchandise. I've been getting a little extra little Southern Outdoorsman decal in there, so we really appreciate that support from everyone who's been ordering a lot of stuff from us. We still have a few shirts left as well, and working on getting some more hats in because a couple different styles sold out extremely quickly. A lot faster than we thought they would. So.
We've already got more on the way.
Yeah.
So it just depends on how long it takes them to get manufactured.
Yep, absolutely. So anyways, appreciate that support there. But this week, we've got an interesting episode because this is the episode we did with Corey Brown.
Yep.
Which turned out fantastic. We got some awesome feedback. We actually had a listener success story come in within 2 days of the episode coming out.
Really?
Today.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah, had a listener success story come in, and actually he didn't submit it. He just commented on the Facebook post about it. He went out and tried some things that Corey talked about and went and killed a buck.
That's what I'm talking about. Did he give any details?
Part of it was, I think he had mentioned, I sent the guy a link to the listener success story. I'm like, please submit it because I want to hear more about the story. But it sounds like it was one of these spots that he was trying to wait for like the perfect win, and he wasn't going to get a perfect win for it. So he said, screw it, I'm just going to go hunt it.
Yeah.
And went and sat in the right spot and was able to get an opportunity at that buck that he was trying to kill.
Oh wow, that's actually going to also kind of play into one of our listener questions for today. So that's going to be a good tie-in. Mm-hmm. I was really excited about Corey's episode just because we went into it where like we haven't interviewed a lot of guys from Oklahoma. Just because, Oklahoma is a lot different, especially the further west you go in Oklahoma, it's a lot different than what we hunt here. So it's a little bit out of our comfort zone. And I'm going to be honest, when you scheduled this interview, I'm like, oh, cool, Oklahoma guy. Like, I'm interested in talking about it because, like you've said, there's something you can learn from everybody, even if he's hunting a different terrain. But the more we got to talk to him during the interview, the more I was like, wait a minute. Like, this kind of sounds a lot like hunting a Streamside Management Zone, or SMZ, like what we hunt here in Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and all these different states that we hunt around the Southeast. I'm like, the longer we got into that interview, the more I was like, oh, wait a minute. And like my light bulb started going off a little bit. So I was really excited to get into that and hopefully apply it here. And actually we recorded that episode and we're going to save it. I mean, we recorded like 3 or 4 weeks out, and we were going to drop it in 3 or 4 weeks, but I was like, let's turn and burn this one because we're getting into early November. There's definitely going to be places in parts of the South that have that November rut.
Yep.
And I'm like, I want people to be able to take advantage of this going into November. So we went ahead and put it out, and already got one listener success. So hopefully some more roll in, which, by the way, the listener success stories have been freaking knocking it out of the park,
dude,
baby.
Y'all have been hammering some studs.
Some big deer.
Some big deer. And the listener success stories that are coming in literally almost every day.
Yes.
Okay. Has been incredible.
So I've scheduled a post on our social media to share, and I have a post, at least one. Some of the days I have 2 scheduled, at least one dropping every single day for the next 2.5 weeks. I like, seriously, it's crazy.
That's awesome.
And a bunch of hammers too, man.
Yeah.
A bunch of good deer getting shot. So yeah, if y'all haven't seen that, you can follow along with us on Facebook or Instagram, and we post our listener success stories there as well as on our website. So you can go and check out some of those that have been dropping here lately. I mean, man, there's one guy who in Georgia killed a freaking stud. I think I sent it to you. I mean, like a big deer, like really big, nice deer, and he's wearing this hat, actually, that chocolate chip hat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's wearing it, and it's like a good.
He just got the hat.
Dude, he got, like, it was right after we sent those hats out, and he killed that deer, and he's got a grip and grim of him with that buck with that Southern Outdoorsman like chocolate chip hat.
Yeah,
and it's like a nice photo. It's like I don't know what he took it with. These phones are so good nowadays, but like it looks like a DSLR photo, and I'm like, dude, I love you, because that looks so good with our hat in it. And I emailed him. I was like, what's your shipping address? And I'm like, we're going to send you some stuff. So other listeners, and hey, this applies for the orange hats. If you send us a listener success story where you are with your deer and you are wearing Southern Outdoorsman merch, whether it be a shirt or a hat, we'll send you a little freebies in the mail. So,
Yeah.
so do that. Send them in, and if you're wearing some merch in the photo and we can use it, we will send you a little care package.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Dude, that's exciting.
So what'd you get out of Corey's episode? What do you think you're gonna apply from it? You know, as we kind of start, we're getting into that time of year.
Mm-hmm.
It's about to be gun season, and for these next couple months, it's really gonna kind of go off the chains for it. We're gonna be hunting a lot. So how are you gonna apply it?
I mean, the thing about one thing that Corey said that I'll be honest, I still don't 100% comprehend, other than like the swirling wind aspect, is the reason why he does it during the rut specifically, like to get down those thermal hubs where a bunch of these creek drainages or these draws are coming together. He kind of says he kind of stays back out of those spots and kind of picks one or two drainages that he'll like to sit on, which I thought was a little bit different, because I would think, that would be the time I'd want to get in one of those spots, because you have the most, point of travel into one specific area.
Yep.
But I think I look back at also like, where are we going to be hunting this year that potentially we're going to have a bunch of SMZs to hunt on? There's a couple places, but it's not like, I don't think it's a huge focus for us this year in some of those areas, especially with like newer clear cuts. But one big takeaway I had was, it kind of goes back to Mason Brook out in Georgia, talking about like the observation sits and everything.
Yeah.
Of kind of, implementing more of that. If you have one of these places, a piece of, whether it's public land, a hunting club, a lease, whatever you're in, private farm, and doing a really good observation sit where you can see over a lot of that clear cut and see the head of some of those drainages coming up.
Yeah.
And those draws, those SMZs, and try to get visual on how the deer are actually using it. Because I think they're going to use it a little bit different every place, depending on how the topography, how water sets up, how the cover sets up, and everything else. But I think definitely, maybe trying to do a little bit more of those observation sits would be extremely handy. Do an observation sit, and like he said, be real aggressive. Once you see a buck do a certain thing, make a move on them, whether it's the same, that afternoon, the next day, whatever, and try to capitalize on it quickly.
Yeah.
Which is, when he brought that up, because I know you asked him that, like, you're like, once you do an observation sit, how many times can you see him? We're like, when would you make a move?
because me and you disagreed on that.
Disagreed on it.
And I was right,
and
obviously.
he was like, dude, I'm going right in there. He's like, I seen him do it one time. He's like, I ain't waiting for him. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yep.
Like, you and Andrew, I'm like, okay, yeah, cool.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm like, I know Andrew feels great right now.
Yes. Feels good to be right. Yeah, I mean, I got kind of the same stuff out of it. It made me think of, we got a clear cut on our club that I'm kind of wondering about doing an observation. Actually, we got a couple on our club. That,
yeah, you do. Yeah.
That I'm interested in maybe doing an observation sit on now, especially because
one of them sets up so good for it.
Oh yeah, I already know which one you're talking about too. Because it would be pretty easy for me to get out there, even if I've got 1 hour before dark, and just shoot up a tree or get on some kind of hilltop where I've got an advantage, because we do have the benefit of having a lot of hills where we're at. So I don't even necessarily in some of these spots have to get in a tree. I can just sit on the ground, kind of like what Corey does, and just glass into over a wide area and see what they're doing. And that would be a pretty wise use of my time, because going back to why one of the reasons I originally joined the club is because it's 5 minutes up the road. And so I can go out there a lot and kind of keep tabs on what's going on. And it actually goes all the way back to the episode we did on chasing tracks with Lee?
Travis Lee.
Travis Lee. Yeah, Travis Lee. Yep. Where I can go out there when it gets closer to the rut, and I can just cruise the roads and find where bucks are chasing does via the tracks. We'll find that episode number real quick. But now that the observation set thing is something else I can incorporate into the tactic for the club in particular. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. What episode was that?
That's episode 432, Targeting Chasing Tracks for Big Bucks with Travis Lee. That's a really good episode, guys, to listen to, especially as you're getting closer towards the rut here. Because Travis, just like in Andrew's situation, he's got a couple different leases and like hunting clubs that he's in, like pretty close to the house. And he'll ride out there during the week before work and just check logging roads, like drive logging roads or walk logging roads, looking for chasing tracks. With chasing tracks, Andrew, what would a chasing track be?
A chasing track would be like where you found a bunch of big splayed out tracks where deer were chasing and running each other. So the track is going to be like kind of like this. If you're watching on the video, like make a peace sign with your fingers. The hoof is going to be real splayed out. A lot of times you'll see the dew claws. Long stride length, so a long stride between the tracks, and hopefully you find, a set of little tracks and a set of really big tracks. And
Yeah.
they're both doing that, and that's where a big buck is chasing a doe.
And even better when you find them, because this goes back to a buck you killed on some public land back in 2019, I think.
Yep.
Where I went into that area and I found chasing tracks on a logging road that ran through this pine thicket, and you were able to go in there on the edge of the pine thicket next to an SMZ.
Yep.
And capitalize and killing a really nice buck coming through there, kind of in within 150 yards of where that chasing tracks were at the day before.
Yeah.
And another thing about chasing tracks is like, especially if it's on a roadbed, it's not like they always run up and down the road or across the road. Sometimes, like in that situation, you could see it was like probably 2 bucks chasing a doe, and they were like, as Travis calls, cutting tracks, or like those deer are like making like a 90-degree turn really quickly. So those tracks are like pushed in and they're like spun a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it's like you'll be like looking at the track. He's like going in one direction, and all of a sudden that track like looks real weird and twisted. And next thing you know, his track's going 90 degrees to the left or right.
Where he planted that foot and turned.
Yeah, because the doe's trying to lose him, and he's trying to like corral that doe.
He's trying to juke him out.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, Travis talks about that in the episode again, 432. So
that's a
definitely
great
go listen to that
episode.
episode.
Yeah, it's a really good episode. So yeah, that's something definitely to pay attention to. But yeah, dude, I'm excited. Speaking of the hunting club, I actually went out there the other day, and for some reason there's been a complete lack of buck sign on that place. I mean, I'll find a rub every once in a while, but like you've walked a good ways out there now too.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you just don't find any freaking buck sign.
No, that's weird.
Like rubs.
And in like high quality habitat areas, no buck sign.
I don't understand it. The bucks are there, but I went out the other day just on a quick, afternoon hunt, and I found the buck sign. Found a good rub line going right up to where I think these bucks are going to be coming out of, and sure enough, rubs coming right out of it. Not whip rubs either, like good, big, solid rubs.
Yep.
Thrash trees, broken limbs, really, really impressive looking stuff. So now I'm gonna try to get some more cameras in there, and perhaps try to do some observation sits in that area, just to try to get some eyes on something. There's a couple of different open areas, without giving away too much, where I can go and I can see a pretty long ways, and maybe get a beat on a deer, kind of crossing through there. And with let's see, it's November 1st on the day we're recording this, so we're about to go to Arkansas, and basically once we get back from Arkansas, it's game time. It's gun season, so I got my gun spots ready. I'm really excited about that place out there. But that brings me to an interesting discussion about like how these deer are betting on the club and trying to figure out where they're spending most of their time. That brings us to the Mississippi State Deer Study that they just put out some stuff. Do you want to go over it? Because you saw it before I did, and you shared it, and it kind of blew up.
Yeah, so they looked at, and I don't remember exactly how many bucks they had in the one image. I think it was just one deer. Was that just one deer?
Yeah, it's one deer.
And it was 39 different bedding locations.
So it was the month of November.
Yep.
So
for the month of November, so they tracked a bunch of different bucks, and this is an area they talked about where it doesn't rut until, they were talking about later December into January in this specific location.
Yes. So this is very much pre-rut.
Pre-rut, or really
like, not even pre-rut.
I mean, still kind of like early season.
Yeah.
And which kind of sets up like your club does, and a lot of Alabama sets up.
Yeah, we rut at the same time.
A lot of like the state will rut into December, going into January. And this buck used 39 different beds in the month of November.
Yes.
Which is insane to think about. Now, the only caveat to it is they never mentioned how old that buck was.
Well, they did say it was an adult buck. So I'm
3 years or older, probably.
Yeah, 3.5 or older is what I would take that as. So they did mention that in the post. I saw people talk about that in the comments. So on the YouTube video, we're going to have the map actually put up on our YouTube video. So if you're an audio listener and you maybe haven't seen this map yet, you can go over to our YouTube channel and jump to this part, and you'll see the map because we're going to put it up. And they did a satellite view, and then they ended up, everyone was like, what about the topo? And so then they posted a topo view at the same time. And when you're looking at this map, all of the red dots and little red circles are the beds, the bedding locations, and then all the white dots are just his location where he was pinged at whatever, like I think it was a 15-minute interval or something like that. Similar to the Auburn stuff, that the Auburn GPS data that we ended up looking at on our Patreon a few years ago, which Patreon members, I reshared that onto Patreon, so it's back at the top of the feed, so it's easy for you to find. You can go check that out on our Patreon right now, where we do a video breakdown of a couple different bucks on in Alabama with some GPS studies. But anyways, So they marked down all these different specific beds, and I saw all kinds of people. Everyone's kind of putting their opinion in the comment section. A lot of interesting stuff. Looking at the satellite image right now, I'm just curious, Jacob. What does anything jump out at you?
Well, a lot of it is they're bedded. He's bedded very close to like access points, like little roadways or cut throughs going through, and a lot of them are on the edges of different like habitat breaks. It's like some of these like bedded right up here against the field. These fields, like in the north east corner, to me is kind of interesting. I wish they posted one of just an aerial imagery. Which one of the listeners found this spot and posted in the comments. But like, you really need to look at it on aerial imagery and not just with all the pins on there, because with all these different pins and all these markers, he uses some areas so much, it's hard to tell what the habitat edges look like right there.
Yeah, that's true.
And then also, it seemed like on the topo map version of it that he was bedded a lot of times in these little drainages and in these little low spots.
Yeah, we'll get to the topo. What about the satellite though?
Oh.
Anything else about what about just the how the pins are laid out? Is there anything that like jumps out at you?
Yeah, the crazy thing is they're like completely separate. It's like two different sections of the property. He's not using the center of this property much, which the center of the property still looks pretty good. But for whatever reason, he's like sticking to specifically the eastern and western sides of this property. But what about you, Andrew? I mean, what are some of the things that you pick up on it?
He's definitely clustered up in certain locations, and this is one of the things that I saw people commenting on. They were saying like, yeah, he's obviously not using the same bed, but there's like clusters of beds, so that would be like your bedding area, and I would agree with that. I think that's what we've been saying for a couple years now. Like, we tried the whole bed hunting thing, and different people have different opinions on it, but like for the deep south specifically, I just don't think that that's true, and stuff like this just kind of drives me further in that direction.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, sure, there's clusters of pins here, but he's clearly using like a certain section of pines, like a couple acres. He's not necessarily narrowed down to one bed, but even that, dude, these beds are kind of all over the place. He's, like you said, he's on two different sides of the property, but also it's not like they're all just stacked right on top of each other. There's like pretty good distance between most of these pins.
Now, another interesting factor about this image is I wish it would have the time and dates, or at least the dates of when these pins are dropped, because there's only one set of pins that go east to west between these two different sections that he used a whole bunch.
Yep.
Which makes me think he was over in one section for a large majority of the time, and then one day he crossed and stayed in this other side for a large majority of the time.
Yeah, that is what it looks like, because there's just like a little breadcrumb trail going between the two, like where he got pinged there a couple times, and I'd be curious if that was like one day where he just kind of slowly made his way through.
And see, that almost looks like there's a drainage that runs right there that he was kind of paralleling. Like, it looks like there's a low spot right there, which I'd have to see what it looks like on the topo. But you have this drainage that comes out of those fields, and it kind of looks like it kind of runs east to west, that he was probably paralleling like a drainage going over further to the east side of the property.
Yeah. Let's see. So now we're looking at the topo. Yes, you're right. You see where he actually went up and over a ridge. He crossed over a ridge and then went up through a thermal hub to get to that other side.
But yeah, kind of falling, kind of going up one drainage, one ditch, up to the top of the ridge, and then drop back over, going through another big bottom, and then up another draw up into this next ridge system.
Yeah, or vice versa.
Yeah,
because we don't know which one he was at first and then went to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, anyways, so I found that super interesting. Really, really cool from MSU Deer Lab to put that out. It's just great food for thought.
I'll tell you another thing that's kind of interesting is during the time frame of when he was on the western side of the property and the eastern side of the property, truly like how small of acreage he's using. Because like you don't have a scale on here of like how many acres we're looking at.
Yeah.
But like this stuff that's over on the east side of the property, does not look like a very large area that he was using at all.
No.
Just looking at it, it looks like maybe it's 20 acres, maybe, in that general area. And then on more of the western side of the property, it's probably, just kind of getting a ballpark here, looking at these mowed trails, it's probably like 30 to 50 acres he was using on that side.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's roaming a huge amount of property, which is something that I think we've had other people talk about, especially like in this more like rolling hill country, like kind of a big wood setting like what we have in the southeast. Like, yeah, there's fields here, but it's not like ag fields. It looks like it's a lot of like just pasture land and everything. it's like these deer really don't have to cover an absolute ton of ground to find food or water, all that kind of stuff. They have so much good resources in one area, they don't have to travel a whole bunch.
Yeah, for sure. Now looking at the topo maps, which again we'll put these up on our YouTube video so people can go see them. But the topo maps, kind of the same. So this actually really reminds me of what we saw when we did our own look at Auburn's data and put that out like in a video. He's using a lot of draws. I mean, he's kind of all over the map. I mean, there's not really one thing that I feel like he's really avoiding. He's on the very top of ridges, like on the spine. He's all the way in the bottoms. He's on the points. He's in the draws. Talking about beds, he kind of beds all over the place. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's one single terrain feature that he's just like really gravitating towards. It's more like he's bedding in proximity to maybe some terrain features, but like there's nothing like it's not like he's like, oh, he's bedding on ridge points.
No,
I mean he's bedding in draws, he's bedding in the bottoms, he's bedding on top, he's bedding on the ridge points too. But that's not like he's not sucked into those ridge points.
no.
Does anything like jump out at you?
Well, one thing that jumps out is just like the huge cluster of pins in this general area, which is, again, we're looking at the western side of this property on the topo map. Is there's like 1, 2, 3 points that come out. And again, this is like, looking at these topo maps, this is very gentle rolling hills. This is not like really steep stuff at all. But just for whatever reason, how he's just sucking in to this general area a lot more than everywhere else. And then also just how much time he spent, especially like in this real big, there's a hub right here on the north side of this little ridge system that he's spending a ton of time down in. But even like the next ridge point to the south of him, he's spending a lot of time on that ridge point and around the tip of that ridge point, and then even up on the flat on the next ridge point further south of him.
Yeah.
So it's like, that whole area for whatever reason. I wonder if there actually is a pond there. It shows, again, per that topo map, that there's water or something right there.
Yeah, you can't tell on the aerial.
But anyway, it's very, very interesting. But it kind of goes back to like just the overall randomness of some of these deer in the southeast, because you're in an area, again, there's typically so much browse for a deer. Like the deer don't just eat acorns, okay? They don't just eat mass crops. They don't just eat your corn piles and everything else. They eat a lot of browse. Especially in the southeast, we have so much variety in browse, and it lasts so late into the season because we don't typically have very harsh winters to kill off a lot of stuff, that there's so much food that they don't have to travel a whole bunch in order to go find high-quality food sources. So, like, I feel like that's another reason why it's so sporadic and random with some of their movement patterns. And instead of, like, going A to B, because it'd be interesting to see data like this coming from ag country, like farm country, and how much, like, is there more variability on bedding locations there, but also is there more or less variability on their movement patterns of to and from like a destination food source?
Yeah. And also I'll say from a bedding perspective, I don't see any real discernible pattern in his beds whatsoever on this map.
No.
Like I said, he's kind of all over the place. I do see a discernible pattern with his other pins, so his non-bedding pins. If you like zoom in on that topo map and you look at just his regular pings, which are, again, the white pins on here, he's very clustered in a lot of areas. And to me, that's like feed trees or something, some kind of food source that he's probably spending a lot of time at.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And, of course, a lot of the beds are in really close proximity to those stacks of white pins. In some cases, the bed's right on top of him, where it's obvious he's bedding either under some kind of oak tree or around some other kind of food source, and he's probably just getting up and walking around.
Milling around.
Now, we don't know that for sure. I'm just kind of guessing about that because there's no dates applied to these. But when you're just looking at like where everything is at, I don't know. I think that's pretty interesting. And one of my one thing when they put out the topo map view, it seems like there's like this main creek drainage. It's like Mulberry Creek, I think it says on the topo map, and he's like really favoring the western side of that topo map, that hillside, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's because of a predominant west wind. Like that's why it's been." I'm like, "You don't freaking know that." That's what I'm talking about. That's my pet peeve about the whole buck bedding thing, and this is where I think people like walk themselves in circles or think themselves in circles about it. Is like you're completely guessing if whether or not that's like a west wind. And so now you're going to decide in your mind that, oh, he's using that because it's a west wind, and you're going to go apply that. And like maybe you find a deer, you know, you walk yourself into a deer that applies to, but I think using that as like a blanket statement, I mean, you don't know. Around here, our predominant winds are a lot of times from the east. Like if you look at a windrows of a lot of areas that we hunt, we have a lot of southeast winds. I mean, that is kind of our predominant wind throughout a lot of months here in Alabama, at least. I'm sure Mississippi's probably similar. So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents about it. I think that he's probably favoring that side more because maybe there's better feed over there.
Well, look, go back to the aerial imagery because all this right here is fields. So,
oh, excellent point.
yeah, it's
excellent
this
point.
wide open. I mean, some of it looks like hayfield. Some of it maybe I doubt there's no CRP, but I bet you it's just like open hayfields and like cattle pasture right here.
Yeah.
And it looks like a lot of the timber is probably the same on both sides. Because my thing is like, what blows me away is just how much he uses this western side, but he doesn't use the center of the property like at all.
Yeah.
At all. And there's food plots. You can see there's food plots all in the center of the property.
No dots in the food plots.
No dots.
At least on that side of the property. There are a couple dots in the food plots near where he normally hangs around. But excellent. Yeah, so that brings back that's an excellent point. I'm glad you pointed that out. Because like if you look at that topo map, you see that he's just heavily favoring that side of the creek, and you're like, oh, again, going back to people, like I saw people in the comment section, they were like, oh, it's because of this wind, like he's getting over there so he can be on the leeward side. It's like, well, probably not, because if you look at the aerial image, the other side of that creek is open fields. And so that's probably why he's selecting that side. It doesn't have anything to do with the wind, I don't think.
Yeah.
So interesting. Very interesting stuff, for sure. Yeah, and also on the other topo map, it's kind of the same thing. Check out this line of pins right here. Like, what is that?
Hold on. He's paralleling. See, I wish you could see better aerial imagery of what he's paralleling right there. Because there's a field, but it almost looks like there's taller grass right here on the south side of that big field in the northeast corner of this aerial imagery. Again, guys, go over to the YouTube channel, watch this. You'll get a better understanding of what we're talking about.
That's fascinating, actually.
But like his pins are absolutely
in a straight line.
They're in a complete straight line. His daylight pins, or like his movement pins per se. Not just probably a lot of this nighttime. But like there's one section right here, which definitely Andrew, you need to highlight this in the YouTube video.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, I can't count. You can't even count all the pins because they are stacked on top of each other, and it is a straight line going back and forth. And based off this key down here, it's showing a mile key down the bottom. Just kind of example, and that line's probably
eighth of a mile.
Maybe like it's probably a 200-yard stretch that he's just working back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and he's kind of bedding sporadically around it. And it actually shows he's got a couple beds in that field, which does not make a ton of sense.
Well, it looks like, there's a field right there, but it looks like half the field is kind of left fallow.
Yeah, so
that could be it. I think that's probably what it is maybe he's working around in that field.
Or he's working that tree line
on
the south side of that field in that kind of overgrown, again, a lot of people will call it CRP, sometimes I call it CRP, but this is a fallow field. It's a field that's let go. It's not CRP because it's not planted like in a
native blend.
Yeah, in that program. But that is super interesting. But then you look at this. So if we go back to the topo, so let's look at this again. So go back to the topo and see if there's any other examples. Like see like right here. So if you look just southwest of that northeast kind of quadrant, where he's kind of working east to west, he's got another line that's running north to south. That's again maybe a couple hundred yards max. That he's just working a ton right there for whatever reason, and he's not on like any kind of specific terrain feature. He's not like he's on a significant drainage or anything like that. See, it's all right here, kind of going back and forth, up and down right here.
Yeah, we're gonna have to find this area on Google Earth because I want to look at it.
But this kind of goes back to like some of these studies. I wish they would do studies like this, where like after they get this data, especially like when it like the month afterwards. Okay, so like you take this information for November, December 1st, you send a crew of people out there to these spots, and you see how does the buck sign correlate with where he was using it.
Oh, that'd be cool.
And I know every buck's going to be a little bit different. They're all going to lay sound a little bit different. But it'd be very fascinating, especially these areas where he's running like a straight line going back and forth. If you find scrape lines there, if you find rub lines there, find anything else like that, and kind of correlate the buck sign based off like how he was using it, and then publish that data. Now, again, every buck's going to be a little bit different, but I think us as hunters would find that super fascinating based off the areas that the buck used the most. How does the buck sign look in that area? Is there a lack of buck sign, or is there a overabundance of buck sign in that general area?
Yeah, very, very interesting.
And see, another thing about this, I wonder how many other bucks they had collared on this property, and how, especially of similar age class, and seeing how they overlapped or stayed apart from each other on a property like this.
Yeah.
Because it makes you wonder, like based off some of the bucks that we'd seen in the Auburn study, some bucks would use a certain portion of like a piece of public, and then another buck would use a different portion of the piece of public, and they would like get close to each other, but they would never like cross paths.
Yeah.
Like on that specific parcel, and it makes you wonder, especially like on this area, like is there another mature buck, where this buck's bedding a lot of times like on the western side of these little ridges. If there's another buck that's bedding on the east side predominantly, and that's like his kind of territory and size, or the side of the property that he really likes, and kind of stays a little bit further over there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That would be really interesting to see. All the linear travel is like super interesting to me though. But I think what I was talking to some people in the comment section about this, and I was just saying, we had a lot of people chiming in with all kinds of different opinions on it, and I think my conclusion from this is like this is the perfect example of why focusing on just really fresh sign I feel like is important for us for where we hunt, because I think that's how, if you were hunting this deer and you didn't have like this GPS data to look at, like that's how you're going to find him and get on him, because if you went out here and you started trying to look for beds, you'd find beds. You'd probably find some of his beds, but you'd probably find a lot of doe beds. You probably find beds from other bucks. And this just, again, underscores the absolute just randomness of how they can. I mean, just the amount of thick cover that he has available to him. He's not limited to where he has to bed. And I don't know how this property is even hunted, but I mean, I think that does make a difference. But I don't know of very many areas that get hunted so hard. Well, if it's on super high pressure public, there's only so many places he can bed. And I'm like, show me the place in Alabama where that's the case. But I'm talking specifically deep south. I'm talking like Nashville and south, basically. I don't feel like that's the case in a lot of areas.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And that's why I love seeing stuff like this, because I think it just, again, underscores the uniqueness of where we hunt, and how they're not limited with bedding at all whatsoever. And so that's why it's better to go out and focus on that really fresh sign, or even historical sign, if you're hunting in the rut. So anyways, any other thoughts on this?
I mean, the other thing is, I would say this. I would want to see, like, I'm always interested, like, we're just looking at one individual buck, but it's like, you could collar 100 bucks and they all do something completely different, and you could find one out of 100 that does what people assume a mature buck should be doing.
Yeah.
So, like, there's always outlying factors. I mean, if you collar enough deer, at some point you're probably going to find what you're looking for, which isn't the way to kind of go about, with scientific data. You're trying to get all the resources, all the data points, and you're trying to make a conclusion, like in a general statement, not just over individual bucks.
Yeah.
But I think, your statement's pretty correct, especially down here. It's like there's so much vastness of, covered habitat types and diversity that, like, they aren't specifically having to hone in on just even a handful of beds, like five or 6, 8 beds. Like, there's so much area that they can go and feel safe and comfortable at. If they only had, again, it looks a little bit different because you hear guys like in the upper Midwest talk about, like, a very specific deer may use a very specific bed during a very specific time of the year. And again, I think that can happen. And maybe in the Southeast, maybe you find a buck on a pattern, or he might use a bed once or twice that week or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like, we know guys who've put trail cameras on a buck bed before and had a image or two of a buck and then not see him for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, he was there, he uses it, but it's not on a consistent enough pattern where you might be able to go in there and kill him out of that bed.
We had a listener actually comment on the post about that, and he said, I think he was in Georgia, and he said pretty much what you just said. They went and found the beds, big, wore out, nice looking beds, threw cameras on them, maybe got a picture of a buck, got a picture of some does, and then like nothing after that, where they just kind of quit using it. And I've had the same experience. I mean, I've put cameras on beds before, like, because I mean, like I said, I went down the whole bed hunting rabbit hole hard for like 4 years, and every time I put a camera on like a big nice bed. Like there was one a couple years back. We've talked about it in the past on the show a good bit, where it was basically a cutover area, pretty thick, pretty nasty, but they essentially cut down through the bottom. So there was no SMZ. So like the bottom was thick. It was like a valley was cut. It's a really unique spot. And there was a little draw going down into it that was thick. And where that draw went up and met the mature timber up top, it was sapling thick, and there was a big fallen log, like bigger than this table, like bigger like width than this table. Big giant fallen log that was all rotten, and there was briars growing up over it, and there was a bed tucked up against it that like smelled like deer. It had hair all in it. It was worn down to the dirt, and I put a camera on it. And over the course of like 2 months, this is like an early season camera when I found it. Over the course of two or so months, I had like one rack buck use it, who wasn't like a great buck or anything, but a rack buck used it, a spike used it, and like 2 does used it. And then the leaves dropped and nothing used it for like a month and a half, and then I went and got the camera. So that was one of the things that kind of opened my eyes to like, you know, just because it's a big giant worn out bed doesn't mean that one deer is coming back to that bed. You know, it could be multiple deer. In that case, it was at least 4 different deer use that same exact bed. And then once the leaves dropped, nothing used it after that. So that was just kind of an interesting case study, you know, that I saw like on my own camera. But anyways, all right, let's get to some Q&As.
All right, awesome. Appreciate everybody been submitting Q&As. I know we say this every single week, but this has been a super fun segment we've been doing now for multiple months, where down in the show notes below on this podcast, so if you're listening on audio feed or if you're on YouTube watching this, you can go down below and actually click the link for listener Q&A. You can write in your questions, and we like to answer them on these outro episodes. So it's super fun and really engaging, because some of you guys, a lot of you guys have some really good questions.
Yep.
And it's kind of interesting getting some of y'all's feedback on, you know, things that you guys want to be, you know, either see or heard discuss, or get like a very specific topic answered for you. So
yeah,
it's been very fascinating.
Yeah, and asking stuff for past guests. We got a Q&A coming up, maybe in the next episode or 2 episodes from now, that specifically pertains to something that Shane Parker talked about. So we're going to reach out to Shane and get some input from him on that. So, you know, if you want clarification from a guest, you can write in with that. You know, whatever you got, you know, write in those Q&As. So also, this is from, first up, this is Chase Turnbow. He says, "What's up, guys? I just want to start by saying y'all are absolutely killing it in the podcast game. I've heard so many people talk about thermal hubs lately. While I understand what they are and somewhat of how they work, U-shaped and V-shaped, could you guys maybe go over how to approach hunting them? I'm talking time of day, positioning in the hub. Should I wait till 30 minutes before dark? How do you play the wind/winds in these hubs, and anything else you guys could think of? Thanks for catering a podcast for us Southern folk, and keep doing what y'all do." Appreciate it, Chase. I think we're probably going to have different opinions on this. I always say that outside of clear cuts and power lines or gas lines, like right-of-ways, I feel like more bucks get killed in bowls or thermal hubs than probably anything else in the South. It's something that
and without even people knowing the term thermal hub.
Yes, 100%.
It's like you grew up.
It was a bowl.
It's a bowl. That's what we called it. Is a bowl. Everybody and their mother would call it a bowl, at least in our area of the country.
Oh yeah.
So
Look,
it's like,
yeah,
and that's like typically, or like just getting down to the SMZs. That's where so many people, whether they're bow hunting, they're gun hunting, that's where people go just naturally. Like again, that's how my uncles would teach us to go hunting. Like go sit yourself in a bowl and you're kill when you're in the rut.
I mean, there's a one in particular that we grew up hunting when I started hunting with the George family. So Ben George and his son Colton, who's one of my best friends. I started hunting with them when I was like about 14 or so, 14 or 15. When they started taking me, they had this one spot, and it was called the bowl. That's what they called it, okay? And the Georges have a wall full of bucks from that bowl, okay? And here was their tactic.
Bowl meaning thermal hub.
It's a thermal hub. And looking back at that same spot, it's a thermal hub that has a saddle dropping right into it. But, you know, it was just a bowl, you know, and Mr. Benny discovered it in like the 80s, and how they hunted it is Thanksgiving would come around, gun season, you got a long weekend, they'd go in there, sit morning and evening for like 4 days in a row and kill a buck all the time, every year. And they've killed a bunch of nice bucks in that spot over the years. Don't care about the wind, don't care about anything. They're going to hunt the bull,
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of people grew up hunting down here, and it worked for them. So I don't know. Bulls can be really tricky because of the wind currents.
Well, how would they go? Let me ask you, because I personally have had a lot of success hunting thermal hubs or hunting bulls.
Yeah.
I've killed my first public land deer, which was a bow buck, killed in a thermal hub on a piece of public. Outside of that, I'm literally trying to think, when have I killed a deer in a thermal hub, or a buck specifically? And I don't know. I'm kind of going. I don't know. I'd have to think really long and hard to try to get one. But like guys like that, and guys like my uncles too, that like grew up doing that. Did Ben George? Was it like a set stand? Were they hunting off the ground? Like
when I was hunting it with them, we went in and we built a ground blind. We got like the camo netting, and we built like a little ground blind on the ground and sat on a bucket, and that's how we hunted it. But he would bring a climber in there and climb on it too.
But was it where, in addition to the hub, was it like down off one of the points? Was it down the bottom? Was it higher up on one of the ridges?
All right, I love to use my hand as an example for stuff because everyone's got a hand. Well, not everybody. Most people.
That was terrible, man. You got some amputee listening to the podcast.
All right, so if you put your hand up in the air and the palm of your hand is the thermal hub, and your fingers are all the little drainages leading down into the thermal hub, we would walk up the forearm and we would sit like right here, like at the base of your thumb, basically. So that's how they would access it, and that's how they hunted it. So they're like looking up into the hub from the bottom.
So sitting towards the bottom of the hub where it goes out to the main side of the creek, and then kind of looking up where all those points are dropping down.
Yes, and really, there was nothing that strategic about it other than just sitting where you could shoot almost the whole thing, because we're rifle hunting. They would occasionally bow hunt it, but it's mostly we're rifle hunters, But like that's how we grew up. We'd squirrel hunt. October would come around, bow season would open, and we would just squirrel hunt until gun season.
Back then, deer season didn't open until November 19th or whatever, because there was no such thing as
such thing as bow hunting.
Yeah.
And then so anyways, that was really all there was to it. Just get where you can see the most of this bowl and hunt it and stay in there. And that goes back to what I've been, I guess, talking about more recently this season, kind of going back to my roots on some stuff of like a lot of times a spot just needs time. And I think the older I get, the more I go back to that. Sometimes you just got to give a spot a chance to produce for you. Just because you go there one time and it doesn't produce, if it's a good enough spot and it's the right time of year, like sometimes it just needs 3 or 4 sits. And that's how they would hunt that. And one time in particular, me and Colton, we were probably 16 at the time. It was Thanksgiving weekend. We had a long weekend. We were off school. It was like Thanksgiving break. And me and Colton hunted in there just for like 5 days in a row for our whole Thanksgiving break that year. And the 5th day, which was Colton's birthday, he shot a buck at like 8:30 in there. Nice buck. He's got it mounted in his house right now. Big, nice 8-point. And it just came walking through. It came down out of that saddle, dropping into the hub at like 8:30 in the morning. Really cold morning. I remember because I was sitting off somewhere else, and I was wearing all my dad's old camo, like cheap, ripped up, like just wearing some crappy gloves. And I remember I like couldn't hardly move my fingers to call Colton when I heard him shoot, because I was trying to type his number in the phone, and I like couldn't get it because my fingers were so cold. But yeah, that's my experience hunting hubs, man. And all that to say that I think that how you're saying that like you've hardly ever killed anything in a hub. Do you put really consistent effort into hunting hubs?
No, I don't at all. No.
So is that probably why?
Yeah, that's exactly why. Because like if you hunt it more, it's like of course you're gonna have more opportunities or more experience kind of hunting those areas. And it's like most of the time I get in one of those hubs, mostly because like the whole wind swirling. It almost seems like every time I try to go to a hub, it's too windy. And it's just the wind's kicking all different directions. So you got to get like real high up on the ridge, like on one of the fingers. And then when you get high enough up, you can't really see down into it.
Yeah.
So you can see like across like one side of the hub to the other side of the hub, but you can't, if something's down below you, like you're not going to see it, but the wind's consistent. But that's why I'm curious, like with them, I'm guessing y'all never cared about the wind.
No.
Like going to that spot.
No.
So
I never even considered the wind until I was like in college.
it just sat down in there. But it makes me wonder, like the times when they had success, how often was it a quote unquote bad wind blowing up into that hub since y'all were hunting like the bottom side of it versus, the wind actually being good or light and variable, like a cold, crisp morning with falling thermals. And like the deer never had a chance to smell you when they came off one side and tried to cross through it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the morning that Colton shot that buck, if I remember right, I don't think it was windy, and so it was so cold it was probably just falling thermals, because he was probably coming through about the time the thermals switched in that area. Because we squirrel hunted the same place, and we would go up into the bowl to squirrel hunt, and again, just like doing stuff totally like wrong, quote unquote, from like a deer hunter's perspective. We would knowing that we're going to hunt this place hard in gun season, we would go in there in squirrel season and just blast squirrels in that place for a month before gun season came in, and then immediately switch out the 20 gauge or the 22 for a deer rifle and go hunt the same spot.
Yeah.
And when you were going in there to squirrel hunt, a lot of times the squirrels really wouldn't, on those really cold mornings, the squirrels really wouldn't start moving until the sun was like really hitting the tops of the trees. So you'd be sitting there and it's daylight. It's way past shooting light, but maybe the sun is just barely hitting the tops of the trees. Like when you look way up, and after the sun was like really starting to warm up the canopies and hitting the tops of the trees, then the squirrels would start moving. And I feel like a lot of times that's when the deer were starting to move too. And I think that's about the time that thermal switch was happening. Looking back at it now, knowing what I know now, I think that's what was going on there. Is that, first of all, I think it was warming up the squirrels and they wanted to get out. But from the deer perspective, I think maybe it's like that thermal switch going on, kind of gets them on their feet. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any advice for thermal hub hunting? I mean, being that you never hunt them.
No, because like when Bo Martonic interviewed me on his podcast, he asked me about them. I'm like, dude, I just don't have a lot of success in them, so I don't have a whole bunch to say. Like I try to hunt them. Like I try to hunt one this past weekend or this past week, but it was kind of the opposite. The wind was blowing up from the bottom of the hub going up to where it all splayed out, so I was sitting on one finger, and there's bucks on in there, but just nothing happened that morning. But it's something I definitely want to try to implement more, just because there's so many good bowls or thermal hubs in a lot of the areas that we hunt. But I think like if it was me going to one of those spots, I would have to feel confident getting down in one of those hubs, because y'all were still hunting pretty low elevation. It wasn't like y'all were still getting higher, like when you're talking about like sitting on your thumb.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were getting like 3/4 of the way up the ridge. Like y'all were probably the bottom third of the ridge or something like that.
It's also pretty gentle, so it wasn't
a big.
It's not like a giant steep hub.
It's like a U-shaped hub, kind of like big kind of drainages going up bowl. But my thing is to feel confident in one of those spots, it would have to be a pretty low wind velocity. So even if it does swirl, as long as I can see 65, 70, 80 yards in one of those spots, if a deer gets within that area, I should have a shot opportunity, especially if it's a buck. If it blows the doe out, okay, it is what it is. But like we'll hear on next week's episode, when I shot a buck on Monday, like a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And the wind swirled right when he came in. He was 40 yards from me, and I never. Looking back at it, I have a different thought now on swirling winds, because I think sometimes you might think the wind's swirling, and it is. You drop milkweed, but it's only going out 20, 30 yards and it's kicking back.
Yeah.
It's not just like constantly going for like 150 yards the opposite direction, because it 100% blew right at that deer, and he kind of looked up, and then he started coming right towards me, and it was after a rattling sequence. And I just don't think my wind ever made it to him. I think it swirled out behind this big beech tree I was sitting on, and then at some point it started kicking back again and never made it to that deer. So it gives me, after having that experience, it gives me even a little bit more confidence hunting in one of those hubs if there is some swirling wind, because if it's swirling for you, it's swirling for the deer too. And unless he gets right there on top of you, or like for whatever reason that wind truly carries your scent quite a distance, outside of visual distance, there's probably, I don't know, like I now have less confidence they're going to smell you in those kind of conditions, especially if you're sitting on the ground. Now, if you're up in a tree and it's lofting up and it's carrying over the top of some of the ridge points, I think there's a little more damage. But if you sit on the ground, I think you can get away a lot more in the swirling winds.
Yeah, I agree for sure on the sitting on the ground part, and that's probably had to do a lot with the success of that spot. And also another thing about that bowl is it had good ground cover in it. So like going up the back side of the bowl when you're kind of going up the big hill, because this is at the base of a pretty big mountain. When you started going up, it was like sparkleberry and like muscadine vines and thick stuff. and they would come cutting around the bottom side of that, or they'd come right down out of it. You just hear them coming from a long ways off, and then they would just materialize out of that thick stuff.
Yeah, so as they materialize, the next thing you hear is boom, and we're gonna be like, well, someone killed one down the bowl, man.
Yeah, that was a good spot. That was definitely a good spot. So yeah.
By the way, Thomas is texting me one of the big bucks is chasing on one of his cameras right now, and our cameras are lighting up right now too.
I figured they would. Man, we ought to talk about that. Golly, we got so much to talk about. We'll talk about that on next week's outro. Don't let me forget.
Okay.
That we got to talk about those scrapes. But anyways, yeah. I to wrap up the thermal hub thing is, I don't know. It's tough. Sometimes if it's the right time of year, because the thing about, like, again, just using the bowl as an example where we hunted with Colton, is it was kind of the perfect storm because it was opening week of gun season, or that Thanksgiving break was like kind of peak pre-rut for this area. Like the deer are rutting pretty good that first week of December. So late November around Thanksgiving, like that's when your rattling's going to work. I killed a buck rattling that week, and not on that property, but just right down the road one time. That's when, your younger bucks are out kind of starting to seek and kind of starting to harass does. And so I think that just putting the time into that spot worked. And, if the wind swirled and you got busted, you got busted. But at the end of the day, it was the right time. It was the right spot. And so you just kind of had to go in there and go for it.
I think another factor, and this is kind of going back to like interviews where we've talked to people that's had success in thermal hubs. I think one important factor based off the other people we've talked to is like having good cover. Like there's got to be a reason for those deer to go through that hub or go through that bowl. I think we should start using the bowl term instead of thermal hub because everybody else uses thermal hub, and like we should just change it up.
Yeah, we're doing bowl. That's a southern term, baby. Bringing it in.
I feel like you need to have, like, if there was a bunch of thermal hubs, the one I would pick over another one is having good thick cover across the ridge points.
Yeah.
Whether like you're in pine country, it's like been select cut pines on top of the ridge points, or even like a clear cut, but also having or it could be mixed hardwoods as long as it's like a little higher stem count, but also having some cover like you mentioned in the thermal hub. Like where it's not just wide open, but like you have whether it's like switch cane growing up, sparkleberry, it could be, if you had like Chinese privet, which you don't want that on a property, but if you had some there, something like that adds, or like holly bushes, something that adds some kind of cover down in that thermal hub. So as the deer go through it, they don't feel like they're completely exposed, and it's probably a better chance you're going to find scrapes and stuff with a situation like that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. This one, the name he wrote in with is Tick Saban. That's pretty good. Old Tick Saban writing in.
I wonder if that's his real name.
So he said, I'm starting to try and get more knowledge into reading topo maps. Have y'all ever thought about doing an in-depth webinar on how to read a topo map? We do have some videos on our YouTube currently where we do map breakdowns. We have several of those. I'll try and link those in the description of this so you can go check them out. But if you go to our YouTube channel and just start scrolling back through videos, there are several where we kind of go in depth on some topo stuff, and we have some stuff in the works, that we're going to hopefully have done in the relative near future, that relates to that y'all are going to be able to look at. That's going to be very in depth. So, yeah, you got anything to add to that?
Nope.
All right, last up, Anonymous says, got a buck coming to a field 30 minutes before dark. He comes out in the middle of the field with doe family groups on each side. Behind his bedding is a creek, roughly 100 to 200 yards from the creek. My question is, how would you access this? Can't walk through the field, so I'd have to go through the woods, but I'm worried about bumping does and spooking him. Would it be best to walk in on the other side of the creek and then cross right where I want to climb, like a J-hook, maybe try to go in midday or super early and wait him out? And then he wrote in again and said, just an update on the field/creek access I sent last week. I went back Friday and glassed the field, ended up seeing 7 bucks, 4 of which were good bucks. 2 were definitely shooters. I went in early Saturday evening and sat through hordes of skeeters and sweat just to have a dog run 2 smaller bucks by me. As it got closer to dark, 7 or 8 does waded across the creek right behind me and came up 20 yards from me. The lead doe could tell something was up. They never spooked but went right back the way they came. Never saw the bucks, but I have a clearer idea about where they are bedding now. I was planning on waiting for a little colder weather to go back in, but what would you do? I did not spook any deer, but I thought it may need to rest for a little while. What do you think?
Number one is if you think that they're bedding across the creek. Now he kind of said a couple different things. So
yeah,
it sounds like he did J-hook in there and set up on one side of the creek, and the deer came from one side of the creek, crossed the creek towards the field. So if he's assuming that the deer are bedded, like all of them are on the other side of the creek, I'd be trying to identify creek crossings going in there. I mean, you might have to do it at night, like 2 hours after dark when the deer are all in the field with a flashlight and look for where those big tracks are crossing the creek.
Yeah.
And then like try to identify which crossing like the bucks are specifically using and setting up down creek from it, downstream from it. So your thermals are going to blow down the creek. But also having a good crosswind where that buck's, he's coming out, he's got a good crosswind for him, but you're just far enough down the creek that they can't smell you, especially if he's talking bow hunting.
Yeah.
And I guess it sounds like that field probably isn't his property. It's probably like a neighbor's property. So I would definitely, like, if it was me and you had that situation, I would try to figure out what crossing those bucks are using. And you're going to have to do it a couple different times a day. Either you need to go in, midday and be very stealthy and have a really good wind blowing out towards the field in order to like look for those crossings, or you might have to go in, 2-3 hours after dark, with a flashlight and just work up and down the creek and try to find that crossing where all those big bucks are crossing at.
Yeah. I pretty much agree with all that. The good thing is the creek, like you said, is a really good medium for tracks. So he's going to potentially be able to go and find tracks in there and figure out exactly where everybody's coming from. So yeah. And the J hook thing, I like the J hook thing. Also with the creek crossing stuff, I don't know what the creek looks like, but a big plus would be like, especially like, let's say it's Saturday, okay, and you're going to go hunt this deer and you think you can kill him on an afternoon hunt, and you just like really want to go in there and set up on this thing. One thing that I like to do in situations like that is, and I've had success with this in the past, is putting on knee boots or hip waders, like whatever you got to do, and getting in the creek. Ideally, if the creek is, hopefully not very deep and you got sandbars and stuff you can kind of walk on, just throw your knee boots on, go walking up that creek and just pay attention to those crossings and find a crossing and actually walk in the creek and not on the bank, because one, you're way quieter in most cases doing that. But also, depending on how high the banks are, you're lower, so you're actually visually hidden as well. And it's just like really good access. And at the same time, you're checking for those crossings that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And trying to get in that way. So I really like doing that.
Just be very cautious. If there's a lot of like river rock in that creek, a lot of round rock and everything, if it's not submerged by water and you step on that crap, it is extremely loud.
Oh, and there's no hiding, that's
Like,
an alarming sound.
It's like louder than walking on gravel. So just try to stay in the water, or if you have to step on some of that rock, like in the small river rock that's the size of 2-3 inches in diameter or smaller, go very, very slowly through that, because it will make a lot of crunching and cracking and popping and stuff. Which will definitely alert to, something to walk through the creek, and, may spook some deer, may not, but definitely it'll be a good access point. And especially if you're looking for those crossings, like definitely walk in that creek if you can. Now, if the creek's too deep, you're just going to have to pick the side, of course, the side that's on the field side, and walk it. But, also this would be a fantastic opportunity to go implement, if you have some cell cameras, take some cell cameras in there and identify what are some of the best creek crossings that you found that has big tracks on it, and put a camera. Don't put it right on the creek. I mean, don't put it like 5 yards off the trail. Back it up just a little bit to be able to look at that creek crossing and try to see if you can get a visual of when those bucks are actually coming through. And then also, it sounds like there's a lot of deer in that area, so there's probably a very good chance you go hunt that, you're going to have to hopefully have quite a few deer get past you before that mature buck comes out. So, just got a lot of eyes, a lot of ears, a lot of noses that you got to deal with. But it sounds like a pretty cool opportunity, though.
Yeah, and also where you said that you saw some deer kind of busted you, kind of not, and whether or not you should go back in or wait for cooler weather. I don't know what the property sets up like, but like what we're going through right now on our club, you found a bunch of feeds on opening weekend of bow season. And since then, Mike, who we're trying to get Mike his first deer, Mike is my stepfather, he's went in and hunted it, I think, 3 times now, 2 or 3 times, and he's seen deer 2 of the 3 times. And we were talking about it, and I keep telling him, I'm like, just keep going in there, because he's getting in and out really clean. And I'm like, if you can keep walking in the creek, he's doing what I talk about. He's throwing on some knee boots or some waders, and he's walking in the creek to get in there. I'm like, I personally, because he's just trying to kill a deer, I would keep walking in there and hunting it as much as I can, as long as you got really clean access, because you don't know when whatever food source they're eating is going to dry up, or their bedding is going to shift, similar to what I talked about earlier, where the leaf drop happened and that bed quit being used. So like stuff changes, and I know he wrote this in a while back, so probably stuff has already changed. But that's just my 2 cents. Is like if you've got a pattern and they're being consistent, I wouldn't wait for them to stop being consistent. I would go in there.
Yeah.
Because odds are, if you wait till it's cold, they're probably gonna be doing something else when it's cold.
Yeah.
You know.
And the good thing is, say you screw up and you bust one of those bucks right now, you still probably have some time before the rut. The does aren't going to leave anywhere. Like they're definitely going to key in on like maybe the tree they bust you out of. But say you mess up early season like this time of the year, if the rut doesn't happen for a few more weeks for you, you still have a good chance to catch one of those bucks coming through there and checking some of those does, and that's when y'all would push maybe a little bit closer towards some of that bedding on the other side of the creek.
For sure. All right, we got reviews on Apple Podcasts that we're going to read. Appreciate all the new reviews that we've been getting. We're going to read 3 of them. First one is from CG Howell 3. He said, subject is mountain hunting, 5 stars, and he just said, love the mountain hunting content. So appreciate that. I'll let you take this one here. Old school wisdom.
All right, so this is from Dr. J the Vet, titled Old School Wisdom, 5 stars. Do yourself a favor and listen to episode 510. Pastor Rick shares old school wisdom that squares with what my old sneaky mentors taught me, plus a lot more. Deer do not have mystical powers, and you do not need to spend thousands on the latest gadgets to be successful. Full of priceless tips and entertaining to boot. This podcast is always good, but this one stands out. Keep it up. Keep it up, guys. Pick a spot.
Nice. Appreciate that. That's a great one. And he's right. You don't need $1,000 worth of gear to go shoot some deer, man. You just need a little bit of woodsmanship, which they don't sell. All right. This is from the Duke 539. This podcast is this is the podcast you're looking for. 5 stars. Full of info, this podcast will give you the knowledge to become a better hunter. Last year was my first year hunting. Don't know anything, didn't know anything, and harvested an appropriate number of deer. And in parentheses, he put none. So he said, now I'm scouting feed trees, playing the wind, and saddle hunting. I took my first deer ever this evening on public land with my bow. Wouldn't have happened without the info I learned here. Thanks. Congrats. I hope you wrote in a listener success story with that deer because we want to see it and we want to share it. So appreciate it. Congrats on the deer. We'll save these other 2 reviews for the next outro.
Sweet. Awesome. Appreciate it, guys. Well, appreciate everybody who's been listening to the podcast, sharing the podcast. Again, y'all been fantastic on sharing the show. Also, appreciate everybody who's been watching the podcast on YouTube. Again, all these episodes, guys, are on YouTube. And again, I highly recommend watching them because you do get a different kind of feel for the episodes when you're actually able to watch the guests. And also, you get to see me and Andrew get a little more excited. Sometimes you can hear our excitement, but you don't get to physically see it. And sometimes we get a little rowdy on the video podcast. So, especially like Corey Brown, I was over here like gawking, like, oh my God, like, okay, we get the connection here.
Yeah, I cut in a couple of the scenes where Corey was talking, and we were like doing this.
Yeah.
I cut in a couple of those so the listeners could see it.
Yeah, pretty entertaining. But appreciate y'all been listening and watching the show. But also appreciate, again, everybody's been buying Southern Outdoorsman hats and shirts. Again, we've got quite a few left, but we'll get some more orders coming in. So, again, if you're on the fence about ordering some hats or shirts, definitely get your orders in. We're trying to ship them ASAP out to you guys and just appreciate that support. But, guys, hope y'all have enjoyed this episode. Hope y'all are having a great deer season. Again, we are very, very busy in deer season. I know you guys are too. If you have success, make sure you write in your listener success story. Click the link down in the show notes below on the show description of this video podcast, and there will be a link there for your listener success stories because we're excited to see all those. Y'all are killing some absolute hammers. So appreciate y'all listening, appreciate y'all watching, and we'll catch y'all back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And remember, y'all stay Southern.